1 Samuel chapter 26, verses 2, 7 to 9, 12 to 13, 22 to 23. Although the Lord delivered you into my hands today, I could not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. In those days Saul went down to the wilderness of Zeph with 3,000 of the best warriors of Israel to search for David in the wilderness of Zeph. So David and Abishai reached Saul's soldiers by night, and there was Saul laying asleep within the camp, his spear thrust into the ground at his head, and Abner and his troops sleeping around him. Abishai whispered to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand today. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not need to strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, do not harm him, for who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and remain innocent? So David took the spear and the water jug from their place at Saul's head, and they withdrew without anyone seeing or knowing or awakening. All remained asleep because a deep slumber from the Lord had fallen upon them. Crossing over to the opposite slope, David stood on a distant hilltop with a great distance between them. But David answered, here is the king's spear. Let an attendant come over and get it. The Lord repays everyone's righteousness and faithfulness. Although the Lord delivered you into my hands today, I could not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Just in case you're wondering why King Saul was in the wilderness of Zeph looking for David, it was because he wanted to kill him. But why? Jealousy, plain and simple. Saul was the king who led his troops into battle and always won. He was certain it was because of his outstanding leadership abilities. He forgot, as we often do, it is God who gives, and it is us who receive. God gave Saul the victories, and it was Saul who took credit for them and ignored God's help in achieving those victories. David had become more popular with the people than Saul. It was a 15 to 19-year-old who defeated the 6'9" battle-hardened 30-year-old Philistine Goliath when Saul was afraid. Samuel told Saul that he was no longer God's king, and he would lose his kingdom to another. So Saul decided to kill David, who he perceived as a threat to his throne. But God was David's protector. From the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 43 to 46. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense, reward, will you have? Verse 7. So David and Abishai reached Saul's soldiers by night, and there was Saul lying asleep within the camp, his spear thrust into the ground at his head, and Abner and his troops sleeping around him. David and his nephew Abishai decided to go to Saul's camp, but for what purpose? Before entering a battle, it's always good to gather intelligence on your opposition. Saul had 3,000 of his best soldiers. David had 600. As luck, or God would have it, David finds Saul asleep. Abishai volunteered to kill Saul, but David says no. But why? In David's opinion, a person who fought against Saul was opposing God. David decides to take Saul's spear and water jug as proof that he had the opportunity to kill Saul, but didn't. Because of David's wisdom, courage, and willingness to obey God, Saul, with his superior force, allows David and his men to leave without a fight.